Okay, so this problem asks us to solve a way of producing this sort of pattern, and obviously the pattern just continues further down here. So first of all, notice that we've got some sort of two-dimensional thing going on here. So we've got a grid, not an entire grid, because there's a sort of a triangle missing here, but we do have a sort of a grid pattern, some two-dimensional structure. And what we're going to do is we want to think of each line here as a row. So these are my rows. So my rows are going down this way, and my columns are going along this way. Okay, so these are my columns, if you like. And what we're going to do is we're going to use a for loop for both the rows and the columns, and they're going to be nested to produce this two-dimensional structure. And we're going to, our outer loop is going to be the rows. So imagine our outer loop is the rows. So we're going to have for and row, and that's going to go in range. And we're not quite sure how many we're going to have. Let's just say 10 for now, and we'll parameterize that later and make it a bit more general. So whatever is going to go inside this block of code here, inside this for loop, basically we're going to produce the row is going to be this counter here. It's going to go down the rows. And notice what we produce for each one of these is the column going as many in as there are rows. So for row 1, there, which is this row, or actually that's row 0, I suppose. For row 0, there is 1 number. And then for row number 1, there are 2 numbers. And row number 2, there are 3 numbers. So there's always one more column than there is rows here. So what we're going to do for each row is we're going to have another inner loop. So for column, in range, and maybe that goes to 10 as well. So eventually it will end up with 10 down here. And this will go 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 10. Okay, so we're starting with that sort of situation. That's the way to think about these problems. Let's switch over now to Python and see how we get on there. Okay, so let's create a new file. File. Oh, here we go, new, that's it, and a Python file. And we'll call this number triangle, shall we? Number triangle. Okay. So here we go. So we're going to actually write this in a subroutine as well. So let's do that. So we're going to have def, we'll call it number triangle. And perhaps we want to know how many rows we want. Number of rows. Okay, so we can have that as a parameter. Okay, the number of rows. So our outer loop for row in range is going to go to num rows, like that. So if there are 10, that will go for row in range 10. If there are 20, that'll be for row in range 20, etc. And for each row, what we want to do is to print off all of the column numbers. So our column is also going to go in range, but we don't want to go to 10, because if we go to 10, or the number of rows here, we would get all of this filled in. Okay, do you see what I mean? We would get all these numbers filled in as well. We don't want that. So we're only going to go up to how many rows there are. So this is just going to be row. And then we're going to print what are we going to do for each one? We're going to print the column number. So for the first row, we're going to print column, column, column like this. So we're going to print the column. Now, since the column starts at 0 and these numbers start at 1, we're going to print column plus 1. So if the column is 0, we're going to print a 1. If the column is 2, we're going to print a 3, etc. Okay, so we're going to do that. Now, at the end of the row, so in other words, when we've finished one of the rows, which is printing off all these columns here, so that's printing the columns. After we've printed that whole column, we want to have a new line. We want basically the cursor to go back to the start, and that gives us a new line. And to do that, we print a character called /n. That means a new line character. Let's see how that works. So let's just call the function. So we're going to have number triangle, and let's try 10. Let's see what happens here. So let's just run that. Oh, I've got this slash the wrong way around here. Beg your pardon. That way around. Let's try that again. There we go. So we've now got 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. And that's what we wanted, except for the fact we wanted to go up to 10, not up to that. So the number of rows that we want actually needs to go up one more. That. And let's try running that again. And there we go. We get our nice coming along. Let's just very quickly go through that again. Our rows are going down this way, and the number of numbers that we have for each row. So here in row number 2, this is the second row, which actually row number 1, 0, row 0 here, row 1 here, row 2 here, row 3 here, etc. So for row number 1, we're going to have 2 numbers. For row number 2, we're going to have 3 numbers, etc. And that's taken into account by saying the range for each column, we're only going to count up to how many rows there are. Okay, so for this one, for example, we know that we're going to count up to 6, which is the number of the row. So that's why we have that like that.